There comes a moment in every man's life when he stops being who he was and becomes who he's meant to be. For Bumpy Johnson, that moment began at 8:13 p.m. on February 12, 1924. It lasted exactly 3 hours and 4 minutes. Until that night, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was no one. Just a 19-year-old kid from South Carolina, 3 years into Harlem life. He worked when he could, read often, and kept his head down. He wasn't plugged in. He wasn't a gangster. Just a quiet kid trying to survive in a city that didn't care if he did. But at 8:13 p.m., his sister Margaret came home crying. Her dress was ripped. Her cheek was bruised. 3 white men had just reminded her that being black meant swallowing pain and shame like it was part of life. People. Who knew Bumpy before that moment say something shifted in him, like something cracked open and rebuilt itself into steel. Cold, calculated, unafraid of consequences. The first man he found, Bumpy was still saying sorry as he struck. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but you touched her." "I'm sorry." The second man, no apology. Just deliberate pain. Bone after bone cracked clean. He wanted that man to remember. Every step. Every breath. By the time he reached the last man, the ringleader witnesses said Bumpy's face was empty. Like he'd gone somewhere deep where mercy didn't exist. When it ended, all 3 lay broken. Bumpy stood alone in the street. Someone asked why he did it. Barely audible, Bumpy said words that would shape the next 40 years. "They made my sister cry. Nobody makes my family cry. Not cops. Not gangs. Nobody. And if they try, they'll learn what crying really feels like." The police showed up. Found nothing. Nobody saw a thing, and the boy who walked into that night didn't walk back out. Because Bumpy Johnson, the quiet kid, died. And Harlem's protector was born. To understand what happened that night, you have to understand Harlem in 1924. This wasn't the Harlem Renaissance you read in books. That came later, when white people decided black art was trendy. Know this. Harlem was rougher, realer, home to 200,000 black men and women packed into old buildings. In a city that barely saw them as human. There were rules. Unwritten, unbreakable. Stay in your lane. Don't answer back. Don't lock eyes with white women. Don't rise above. Don't resist. Break those rules. And men like the Hudson Dusters reminded you what your place was. Tommy Connors and his crew ran the West Side docks, back rooms, alleys. All Irish. All convinced that whiteness gave them license to do as they pleased. They'd been bleeding Harlem for years. Extorting stores, roughing up locals, making sure everyone remembered who really ran things. And on February 12, 1924, they saw Margaret Johnson. She was 21. Worked downtown as a seamstress. Brought home just enough to help Bumpy cover rent for their place on West 139th. She was smart, careful, knew the streets. Head down, no trouble. But that day, she wore a blue cotton dress. Clean, simple, sharp, not flashy, but proud. The kind of dress that said, "I matter." The Hudson Dusters saw that dress and saw an insult. It happened at 7:30 p.m. on the corner of 134th and Lenox. People were out: commuters, store clerks, men heading to backroom bars. Margaret walked home, hands in her pockets, wondering if Bumpy had remembered the bread like she asked. Then 3 men stepped from an alley, blocked her path. "Where you off to, girl?" The leader, Tommy Connors, 28, 6 foot tall, scar on his cheek from a Brooklyn knife fight. "That's a real fine dress for a colored girl. You steal that?" Margaret didn't answer. Tried to step around. That was the rule. Don't react. Don't invite more. They didn't let her pass. One Patrick Flynn grabbed her arm. Tommy asked, "You something? You deaf or just dumb?" Margaret yanked her arm free. "I bought it. Now let me through? Tommy laughed. Loud and ugly. You hear that, boys? She bought it. Thinks she's some kind of lady. The slur came next. Harsh, loud, meant to sting. 50 people heard it. 50 kept walking. Because that's what survival looked like in 1924, Harlem. But they weren't finished. Flynn shoved her lightly against a wall. Not enough to injure, but enough to make a point. Enough to show who held power. You know what your kind doesn't get? Connor stepped forward. You come up from the South thinking you're going to be somebody, but you're not. You'll never be more than what you are. He grabbed the collar of her dress. Cut ends here in your draft. If you'd like me to finish this section or the rest of the story, just let me know. The fabric ripped. Not fully, just enough. Enough to bare her shoulder. Enough to shame her. The other man, Sean O'Brien, let out a whistle like she was some stray dog. Margaret felt tears sting her eyes, not from fear, but from fury. From the sick knowledge that nothing she said, nothing she did, would stop. These men could do whatever they wanted and no one would stop them. And if the police did show up, they'd probably help finish the job. Then Tommy Connors made the mistake he'd regret forever. He slapped her, hard, so hard the sound cracked down the block. So hard it left his palm imprinted on her face. That's for getting mouthy, he sneered. Next time, keep walking when white men speak. Then they walked off, still laughing, still proud, bragging about what they'd do if they saw her again. Margaret Johnson stayed against that wall, torn dress, swollen cheek, tears running down her face, and 50 people passed her like she didn't exist. She walked into their apartment 43 minutes later. Bumpy was at the kitchen table, reading like always. That night it was a book about Napoleon's battlefield campaigns. He read everything: history, philosophy, war. Dropped out at 14, but he was self-taught, learning how power worked, how empires were built. He looked up when the door opened, saw her, and the book slipped from his hands. Margaret wasn't crying anymore. She'd stopped 3 blocks back, wiped her face, smoothed her torn dress, put on that expression she always wore, I'm fine. It's nothing, but Bumpy saw through it right away. He stood up slow, walked over, didn't speak, just looked at the ripped fabric, the red cheek, the dry eyes that had been wet minutes ago. Who? His voice was low, dead quiet. Margaret shook her head. It doesn't matter. Who? Bumpy, don't. I don't care who it was. Still calm, still quiet. Which scared her more than shouting ever could. Tell me who did this. Margaret tried. She tried to say it wasn't worth it. That the Hudson Dusters would kill him. That he needed to let it go. But when she looked into her brother's eyes, she didn't see rage. Rage would have been easier. This was something else, colder than hate, clearer than anger. It was certainty. They laid hands on you, Bumpy said. They made you cry. A pause? No one does that. Not to you. Not ever. What are you going to do? She asked. His face didn't change. I'm going to make them wish they were never born. He walked out. The door shut. And Margaret stood alone in that kitchen, knowing that when her brother came home, if he came home, he wouldn't be the same person who just walked out. What the Hudson Dusters didn't know about Bumpy Johnson, what no one knew, was that he'd grown up fighting, not for sport, for survival. Back in South Carolina before Harlem, Bumpy learned early. Hit first. Hit hard. Don't stop. He wasn't trained. Wasn't a boxer. Just a kid who fought his way through white bullies, hunger, and a world that wanted him small. He fought like someone who knew that losing didn't just hurt. It meant you'd never feel safe again. And tonight, 3 men had made his sister feel unsafe. The first one was easy. Patrick Flynn, the one who grabbed Margaret. The one who laughed when her dress tore. Bumpy found him outside McNally's pub on 133rd Street. Flynn was drunk, alone, smoking. Bumpy approached quietly, steady. Flynn heard footsteps, turned, saw a young colored kid. Started to smile. Started to say something stupid. Too late. Bumpy hit him. Not wild. Surgical. A punch straight to the nose. Cartilage snapped. Blood flowed? What the? Second hit. Ribs. Cracked. Flynn folded. Then Bumpy spoke, calm, cold. You touched my sister. It sounded like a teacher explaining a simple rule. You grabbed her. Mocked her. Thought it was funny. He kicked Flynn, right in the side. I'm sorry, Flynn gasped. I'm sorry. Whatever I did, No, you're sorry you're hurting. Kick. That's not the same. Bumpy crouched down, grabbed his collar, pulled his face close. My name is Bumpy Johnson. Margaret is my sister. And every time you look in the mirror and see this face, you'll remember you don't lay hands on black women, ever. Flynn nodded, terrified. Bumpy stood, looked down at the bloody man slumped on the ground and felt something unusual. He felt calm. Not joy, not pride. Just clarity, like this was what all that reading, all that learning had prepared him for. Like he'd found the first piece of who he really was. He turned, walked away, one down. 2 to go. The second one was Sean O'Brien. He was drinking in a speakeasy on West 137th. Bumpy walked in. 30. People inside laughing, drinking, playing cards. Nobody noticed the young black kid at first. Not until he walked straight toward the table where a white man sat alone. Then the noise in the room started to fade. Because the way Bumpy moved? That wasn't a kid picking a fight. That was something else. That was danger looking for a name. You were on 134th and Lenox today. Not a question. A fact. O'Brien looked up. Saw a black kid with split knuckles. Blood across his shirt. His hand went to his coat. Too slow. Bumpy snatched a bottle from the nearest table and shattered it against his skull. Chaos. Chairs screeched. People shouted. Everyone backed away. O'Brien fumbled for a blade, got it halfway out before Bumpy slashed across his face with the broken glass. Deep cuts. Blood everywhere. It was over in 90 seconds. O'Brien hit the floor, gurgling, bleeding, half conscious. Bumpy stood above him, breathing heavy now. His voice rasped. That makes you guilty too. The bartender was yelling, threatening to call the cops, but no one stepped in. No one dared, because every soul in that speakeasy had just witnessed something they'd never seen. A black kid who didn't flinch, who didn't run. We're lying on the floor. Tommy didn't scare. Easy. He'd beaten men. Killed a few. He wasn't about to let some teenager embarrass him in front of the city doc, so when Bumpy found him at McNally's pub on 133rd, Connors was ready, knife in his belt. That took guts. But you screwed up coming for me. Bumpy said nothing. Just walked forward. Tommy struck first. Cracked across Bumpy's jaw. The knife tore through coat, not flesh. He caught Tommy's wrist, slammed it into the bar. The knife dropped, then it was fists. Raw, messy. Just rage. Tommy was bigger, stronger, more experienced. Landed heavy shots, ribs, gut. Bumpy went down hard. Tommy stood over him, panting. Stay down, boy. Not deep, but enough. Tommy stumbled. Bumpy rose. Smashed a bottle into Tommy's face. Tommy hit the floor. Blood streaming. Bumpy dropped on top of him and started punching, slow, controlled, breaking something with every strike. You hit my sister. You tore her dress. You made her cry. Tommy covered up. Tried to fight back, but Bumpy wasn't stopping. Couldn't stop. Every insult, every bruise. Every tear Margaret had shed was behind those fists. Eventually, Tommy gave up. Went limp, whimpering, barely conscious. Bumpy rose to his feet, shaky. Everything ached. His ribs screamed. His knuckles were wrecked, but he'd won. He grabbed Tommy by the shirt, lifted his head. "You hear me?" Tommy blinked. Bumpy dragged Tommy Connors through Harlem, through streets that hadn't. Doors cracked open. Even after midnight, word had spread. The kid who wrecked the Hudson Dusters was coming, and he was dragging their leader behind him like trash. Bumpy dropped Tommy in the middle of 134th and Lenox. The exact place Margaret had stood in shame 12 hours earlier. "Get on your knees." Tommy looked up. His face was ruin-cut, bruised, swollen. He tried to speak. Blood came out instead. "I said, on your knees." Tommy obeyed. He understood now. This wasn't about pride. This was survival. Now apologize. Bumpy's voice was calm again. "Apologize to my sister and to every single person watching." Tommy's lips moved. Nothing came. Bumpy crouched. Spoke low. "You can say sorry, or I can break both. Your hands, and then you'll say it anyway. Pick." I'm sorry," Tommy whispered. "I'm sorry I touched her. Sorry for the things I said. I'm sorry." 50 people stood witness. A man who'd terrorized Harlem for years was now crying on his knees in the street. Bumpy turned, faced the crowd. "This is what happens when you disrespect black women in Harlem. You don't die. You live with everyone knowing what you really are." He looked down at Tommy one last time. "Leave Harlem, don't come back. Because if I see you again, it won't be an apology. It'll be a funeral." And he walked away. Left Connors sobbing on the pavement. And every single witness would retell that story until their last breath. But Bumpy knew something most boys his age didn't. Power wasn't about winning one night. Power was making sure you never had to fight that battle again. The next morning, Bumpy walked into the Savoy Ballroom, asked to speak with Stephanie St. Clair. The Queen of Numbers already knew. Everyone in Harlem knew. A 19-year-old had broken the Hudson Dusters and made their leader beg in the street. "You're Johnson." She said. Stephanie was in her 40s, sharp, regal, dangerous. She ran a numbers empire worth thousands every week. "You made quite a scene last night." "Yes, ma'am." "And now you're here," Stephanie said, "because you're smart enough to know Tommy Connors might come back. Might try to finish what you started, and you want protection." Bumpy shook his head. "No, ma'am, I want a job. I know how to find things out. I can organize people, fix problems. You need someone like that. And I need someone who'll make sure Tommy understands touching me means going to war with you." Stephanie studied him. Most kids that age wanted to prove they were tough. But this one? He wanted to prove he was useful. That was rarer. And worth more. "What makes you think I need you?" "Because I showed I can handle myself. I can learn. I'll outwork anyone in your crew. I'll never bring heat to your doorstep. All I ask is one thing: make it known I work for you now." Stephanie didn't speak for a long time, a slow smile. "You start Monday." By that afternoon, the word had spread like fire through New York's underworld. Bumpy Johnson was working for Stephanie St. Clair, and anyone who touched Bumpy, they'd be picking a fight with the Queen of Numbers. Tommy Connors heard it, and he got the message. He couldn't lay a hand on Bumpy without setting off a war with the most powerful black operator in the city. But that wasn't the worst of it. His own people, the Irish mob down by the docks, had heard the rumors too. Heard how he'd cried in the street. Heard how a 19-year-old colored kid had dragged him through Harlem and made him beg. And in their world, you don't survive weakness. They turned their backs on him. 3 days later, Tommy Connors boarded a trained to Boston. Found work on the docks there, never came back. Never spoke of that night again, not because Bumpy beat him, because Bumpy made revenge impossible. He'd shattered Tommy's reputation so thoroughly, so completely, that even his own crew wanted nothing to do with him. And now Bumpy was protected by a woman so powerful, hurting him was suicide. Tommy had two choices: disappear and live, or stay and die. He vanished. The story spread fast. Not just in Harlem, but across every back room in New York. There was a kid named Bumpy Johnson, 19, took on 3 white gangsters solo because they touched his sister, made their leader kneel in front of half the block and apologize. Now he worked for Stephanie St. Clair. The legend was born. But here's the part that matters. On February 12, 1924, Bumpy Johnson stopped being a scared teenager from South Carolina. And became something else. A protector. A symbol. Proof that respect wasn't handed down by white men. It was taken. The 3 men Bumpy put in the hospital that night, they left Harlem and never came back. Within 3 months, the Hudson Dusters were gone. No one wanted to wear the colors of a gang that got destroyed by one teenager. And Bumpy? He spent the next 40 years building something bigger than money. He built power, a structure, a shield. Something that made sure what happened to his sister would never happen to anyone else's. He became a king, feared by enemies. One moment where a boy chose family over fear. This story won't be in school books. The police buried it. The men who lost never dared mention it. But Harlem never forgot, and for the next 4 decades, anytime someone new came through thinking they could intimidate this neighborhood, someone would pull them aside and say, "Let me tell you about the night Bumpy Johnson fought 3 men. He didn't hesitate, didn't stall, didn't ask permission. He just did what had to be done. And that." Subscribe for more untold stories about Bumpy Johnson, the man who stood between Harlem and the people who tried to break it. Drop a comment. What would you have done in Bumpy's shoes?